The pit lane in Hungary is still buzzing with a sound no one expected, the sound of a victory that was not a victory at all. Max Verstappen stood on the podium, champagne in hand, a second-place finish that looked like a triumphant return to form for Red Bull. But here is what the paddock is not talking about. His own team principal had already written off that result before the race even started. That second place was a miracle, and miracles are not something a championship-winning team should ever need. Laurent Mekies told everyone listening that the team's own calculations predicted a maximum finish of 5th place. He named Lando Norris and both Ferraris as unreachable. That is not the language of a team aiming for glory. That is the language of a team that has already surrendered. And then Verstappen went out and delivered a result 3 places higher than his own engineers believed possible. That result was not a step forward. It was a desperate act of defiance. The answer to why this matters starts with a confession from the very top of the team, a confession that leads directly to the most uncomfortable truth Red Bull has faced in years. The confession came from Laurent Mekies himself. In his post-race media session, he laid out exactly what his team's computers had calculated before Hungary. Lando Norris would be unreachable. Both Ferraris would be unreachable. The only cars they could fight were the Mercedes and probably Oscar Piastri. Do the math. If Norris wins, both Ferraris finish ahead, and you are only fighting for position against the Mercedes and one McLaren, then the best possible outcome is 5th place. That was the ceiling. Mekies also admitted that Red Bull never gave Verstappen or Isaac Hadjar a car they could actually push with. He compared it to Spa and Austria, where the drivers said the car felt roughly as it should. In Budapest, that was never the case. This is not a team principal making excuses. This is a team principal delivering a clinical diagnosis of his own machinery. He is telling the world that his drivers spent an entire weekend wrestling a car that refused to cooperate. The gap between what the team expected and what Verstappen delivered is not a reason to celebrate, it is a reason to worry. The warning signs were there long before Sunday. On Friday morning, Charles Leclerc topped the first practice session and Lewis Hamilton set the pace in the second. Verstappen could only manage 4th, but the real alarm came from Pierre Wache, the technical director, who admitted they were not where they should be and the drivers were not happy with the balance. Those words came on Friday. The problem was already diagnosed with 2 full days still ahead. Qualifying turned that diagnosis into an emergency. Verstappen set the 6th fastest time, 0.8 of a second behind Norris on pole. In his final flying lap, he spun in the last corner and said the car was aerodynamically completely broken. He said they had no tire slide, only car slide. That is a driver describing a machine that has lost its fundamental connection to the road. The problem did not appear on Saturday, it was already there on Friday. The RB22 has been inconsistent all year, and that pattern is exactly why Red Bull now sits 4th in the Constructors' Championship. The race began with Verstappen moving from 6th to 4th before the first lap was complete, thanks to grid penalties for Hamilton and Kimi Antonelli. But the real chess match started when Hamilton pitted early for fresh tyres. Red Bull made a conscious decision not to follow him, deliberately leaving Verstappen out on track. It was a gamble that looked desperate in the moment and brilliant in hindsight. The moment that flipped the race came in round 16, when Verstappen launched his car down the inside of Hamilton into turn 1. On a track where overtaking is notoriously difficult, with a car he had called broken, he made it stick. Verstappen admitted after the race that it was his only real chance. Then came the call nobody expected to work. With 29 laps remaining, Red Bull fitted a used set of soft tyres to his car. Verstappen asked over the radio if anyone could prove that set would last. Ferrari did not see it coming, and Frédéric Vasseur admitted his team was caught off guard. The second place was built on courage and precision, not on speed, and that is where this story takes a darker turn. When a team has to win with strategy and driver talent alone, the car itself has stopped being a weapon and become a burden. Martin Brundle made a comment after Hungary that cut straight to the heart of Red Bull's dilemma. He said, "Very few drivers can take an unstable car and still drag it onto the podium. Verstappen did exactly that. It sounds like a compliment, but there is a hidden danger. When a driver becomes the only reason a car looks competitive, the team stops feeling the full pain of their mistakes. Anthony Davidson offered a measured take, noting that with a second and sixth place finish, Red Bull could not be too unhappy. But the British paddock observers drew a different conclusion. They noted that both Norris and Verstappen are consistently extracting more from their cars than the machinery should allow. At McLaren, that is a luxury. At Red Bull, it is starting to look like an addiction. The evidence was right there. Verstappen finished second, but Hadjar finished sixth, more than 50 seconds behind. That gap is proof that the car is fundamentally difficult to drive, and only one driver on the grid can work around its flaws. His brilliance is a gift and a curse, because as long as he keeps scoring podiums, the team can convince themselves that everything is fine. The championship standings after Hungary paint a painful picture. Verstappen sits sixth with 109 points. Kimi Antonelli leads with 219, followed by Hamilton on 169, Russell on 160, Leclerc on 138, and Norris on 128. That is a 110-point gap to the leader. The Constructors' Championship tells an even worse story. Red Bull sits fourth behind Mercedes, Ferrari and McLaren with 177 points. Mercedes leads with 379. Now factor in the rumors circulating through the paddock. There is a performance clause in Verstappen's contract that would allow him to leave at the summer break if he is not inside the top two. Red Bull has never confirmed this, but consider the facts. The team principal admitted the car was only capable of fifth. The driver said the car was aerodynamically broken. The championship position is sixth, not second. What would any world-class driver do? If your team gives you a car that cannot fight for wins, if your own engineers calculate a maximum of fifth place and you are 110 points behind, then leaving is not emotional, it is professional. Verstappen has already given Red Bull 4 championships. The question is whether Red Bull has anything left to offer him. The summer break is supposed to be a chance for teams to catch their breath, but for the engineers at Red Bull, there will be no rest. The fundamental problem with the RB22 is not a single component that can be swapped out. It is a structural issue with how the car generates downforce and maintains balance. A new floor or front wing would take months to design and test, not days. The specific complaints from Verstappen paint a clear picture. He said the rear kept falling away and the front refused to turn properly. That combination is a nightmare because it means the car is unstable at both ends. Fixing one issue often makes the other worse. That inconsistency is the signature of a car that has lost its aerodynamic foundation. While Red Bull tries to understand their own car, McLaren and Mercedes are pushing forward. The gap in the Constructors' Championship is already massive. The viewer can watch for the signs in the next race. Pay attention to whether Verstappen still complains about rear grip in the second half of a stint. Notice if the gap to pole remains half a second or more. Those numbers will tell the real story. And if the same problems appear again, the summer break will have changed nothing. The paradox of Hungary is now impossible to ignore. Verstappen stood on the podium, collected 18 points, and gave Red Bull a result that looked respectable. But respectability is not what this team was built for. They were built to dominate. That second place, the one that came from a car the team itself had written off as a fifth-place machine, is the most dangerous result they could have produced, because it proves that their championship hopes now rest entirely on one driver performing weekly miracles. That is not a strategy. That is a gamble. Laurent Mekies listed 3 reasons for the result. The race pace was better than expected. The strategists took risks that worked. And then there was what he called the max factor. 2 of those 3 reasons are about people, not the car. The machinery itself was never mentioned as a positive factor. And that is why this second place is so expensive. It buys Red Bull time, but it also buys them a false sense of security. Every podium Verstappen drags out of this car delays the moment when the team has to confront the full scale of their problems. The data does not lie. The Constructors' Championship gap is enormous. The qualifying deficit is growing, and the driver, the one man who makes all of this possible, is running out of reasons to stay. How much longer will he keep fighting for a team that cannot give him a car worth fighting for? The answer to that question will define the rest of this season and maybe the entire future of Red Bull racing.